there is the boasting. Is it true? I do not know, but it is said that people from Texas boast a great deal. Well, they have a good reason to boast, but it seems as if this particular Texan was talking to someone from Boston, and he was speaking about the siege of the Alamo, and he says, just think of it. He says, one man alone stood off invading armies. And the man from Boston said, well, have you ever heard of Paul Revere? The Texan says, isn't he the man that ran for help?
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. Hello, Catholic pilgrims, and welcome to week 40. So our topic this week is patience. And it kind of cracks me up that this is the topic because I went to confession last night with my family, and we got there at the time that was listed on the website, and we get in there and there's already, a fair number of people in the line. And so we get our place and the line is filling up and nobody's going into the confessional. And so after a while, we all start to kind of look at each other like, man, whoever is in there is taking forever. And I kind of joked with my daughter, it's like, it must be a serial killer in there. And so then this guy comes in and informs us all that the priest hasn't shown up. There's no priest in there. So we've all been standing there thinking that someone's in the confessional and they just haven't come out yet. And you can kind of see everybody getting impatient, like looking around the corner, what's going on? Who is this person? Why are they taking forever? And the irony of us all standing there waiting to go in and confess our sins, and yet we're struggling to be patient. And as it turned out that on October 1st, the times had changed for confession on Saturdays. And so this lady apparently knew the deal. And she informed us all, and then we all were kind of like, oh, that's why no one's coming out. And so then, shortly after, the priests show up, and we all get to go into confession. But you could really see everybody growing in impatience. So it's kind of funny that this is the topic for this week. So we'll jump right in, and our 3 key points are submission, self-possession, and remedy. Number 40, patience. The opposite of flying off the handle is patience, another virtue forgotten by our modern world, although our blessed Lord said, by your patience you will save your souls. Luke 21:19. The Greek origin of the word patience suggests 2 ideas. One, continuance. The other, submission. Combined, they mean submissive waiting, a frame of mind which is willing to wait because it knows it thus serves God and his holy purposes. A person who believes in nothing beyond this world is very impatient because he has only a limited time in which to satisfy his many wants. The more materialistic a civilization is, the more it is in a hurry. Douglas Woodruff, the English essayist, said that Americans do not like Rome. They heard it was not built in a day. The Chinese, on the other hand, can wait for centuries, for their wants are not compassed in a generation. Patience is not something one is born with. It is something that is achieved, such as seeing. A baby has to learn to see, to distinguish objects, and to learn distances. Sight is a gift of nature, but seeing has to be won. When our Lord healed the blind man, he had to learn how to see. For he said that to him, men looked like trees walking. Mark 8:24. So it is with self-possession and patience. But such a virtue is developed by resistance and control. The big problem all of us have to face is whether we will, under difficulties, ride out the storm to port. Of course, if we do not know why we are living, then we must substitute tiny little wishes for one great consuming purpose, and this makes life miserable and unhappy. To us, often, the principal thing is the frustration, the war, the dislocation, the chaos, and the confusion. But patience ought to be the guiding virtue of the soul in the midst of this confusion, worse confounded. The winning of the battle of life is nothing but the winning of our souls, and souls are won by patience under tribulation. Patience is not a virtue to be practiced only by the sick and by those in prison. Actually, few virtues are more essential for peace of soul, for there are hardly any circumstances of life where it cannot be practiced. There are 4 great areas of life in which patience can be learned. First, in the midst of provocations, that is, the indifference of others, the incivility and haughtiness of those with whom we work, the vexations at home, in the office, and on the highway. One of the reasons why people who are calm at home are impatient behind the steering wheel is because they know, as they shout at other drivers, that they are unknown. They regard anonymity as a shield for their character. Second, in disappointments, the rain on the day of the picnic, the late dinner guest, the canceled visit, and the honor that never came through test us. Giving way to violence under these circumstances is a loss of self-possession. Third, restraints. No one can always be his or her own master. The tin can that will not open, the key that will not turn, the zipper that refuses to zip. All these are circumstances under which losing one's temper is to lose inner calm. It does no good to blame the club when the golfer is at fault. To be impatient is to aggravate the evils we must endure and thus postpone their solution. Fourth, injuries and wrongs. No station is so high as to be immune from unjust criticism. The higher we climb, the better the target we make for sticks and stones. It is well to remember under such circumstances that Walter Winchell once said, "No man will ever get ahead of you as long as he is kicking you in the seat of your pants." There are many who excuse themselves, saying that if they were in other circumstances, they would be much more patient. This is a grave mistake, for it assumes that virtue is a matter of geography and not of moral effort. It makes little difference where we are. It all depends on what we are thinking about. What happens to us is not so important, but rather how we react to what happens. Judas and Peter both sinned against the Lord, and he called them both devils. But one became a saint because he overcame his weakness with the help of God's grace. It is the winds and the winters which try the herbs, the flowers, and the trees, and only the strongest survive. So tribulation tries the soul, and in the strong it develops patience, and patience in its turn hope, and hope finally begets love. Patience is the great remedy against becoming panicky. To be able to use reason and good judgment when everyone else goes to pieces not only saves self but also neighbor. Men use reason better when they are calm. Women use reason best at the point where man loses it. Passion impairs reason in a man. In a woman it does not. But, regardless of these differences, the patient soul can use judgment and counsel when all others are agitated and disturbed. Patience is power. As an Eastern proverb put it, with time and patience the mulberry leaf becomes satin. Patience is not absence of action, rather it is timing. It waits on the right time to act for the right principles and in the right way. The yoke sits easiest on the neck of the patient ox, and he feels his chain the lightest who does not drag, but carries it. I don't know if I am the best person to give my reflections on today's readings because I am a very, very impatient person. I know it. I try to work on it. I asked one of my coworkers one time, I was like, I just wish that God would make me patient. I pray for it all the time. And my coworker said, well, Amy, he'll give you trials to test your patience. I was like, oh, yeah, I guess God isn't really like a fairy godmother. He doesn't just poof, make us patient or poof, make us whatever virtue we're asking for. He will give us the opportunity to practice that virtue. And I obviously get to practice it a lot, and I don't always do the best job. I am getting better, but man, there is a lot of room for improvement. So I thought I would have some fun today and tell you about a story where I became so impatient and how that really did not bode well for my character and how I was presented to other people. And it just was not a good situation. Looking back on it now, I can laugh about it, but man, going through that moment, it was ugly. I'm sure I embarrassed my husband to death. But what I want to do is I want to tie it into the 4 things that he talks about that aggravate us. If you remember, the first is provocations, just the indifference of other people, incivility, haughtiness, just vexations that we have to deal with. Second is disappointments, like the rain on the day of the picnic. Third is restraints. When something's holding us back, we can't do what we want to do, like the zipper won't zip and we're trying to get out the door, things like that. And then fourth is injuries and wrongs, where somebody is wronging us or we feel injured in some way. So those are the 4 places, or 4 things rather, that he lays out where we can be tried in patience. And so I think I have a story that pretty much encompasses all of those things. So when my oldest was 2 years old, we lived in Dayton, Ohio. And during the holidays, we would typically go home to Kansas or to Texas to visit my husband's parents. This particular Christmas, we were heading to Kansas, and we usually flew out of the Columbus, Ohio airport. And so this was back in the early 2000s, so there weren't smartphones, and typically what I did is I would get online and I would print off directions to wherever I was going. You remember those days? We'd pull up like MapQuest, I think, and there's an option to print them off, and you'd carry your papers into the car and follow the little directions on there. So anyway, I did that. And we left with plenty of time and no problem there. We weren't rushing out the door. We weren't panicked. Everything was cool. Well, as we near Columbus, Ohio, we get a big, big disappointment. There's construction and there's a detour. We didn't know Columbus that well. And so all I had in front of me was this MapQuest printout that told me the way to go, and I couldn't go that way anymore. So we took the detour, and there were no signs really to get back, on your path. So, my husband and I, we kind of start panicking because this wasn't part of the plan. We allotted for time for exactly driving there, getting parked, getting into the airport. And so this has been thrown into our way. And so for some reason, we end up kind of down possibly by Ohio State. I don't really know where we were. And there were no signs. We were totally lost. There was nothing that was pointing us to the airport. And so more panic starts to set in because we ended up in like a residential area. No clue where we're at. And so I see this guy walking his dog in this residential area. I'm like, oh, pull over and ask him the way to go. And he looks like a professor kind of. And so we pull over, my husband rolls down the window and we're like, hey, excuse us. And he kind of walks over cautiously. I don't blame him. And he walks over cautiously, and my husband's like, hey, there's some construction back there. Can you point us in the direction of the airport? And the guy looks at us like we have 3 heads. And he's like, the Columbus International Airport? And oh my gosh, I just about lost it on this guy. I was like, in my head, I was going, no, dummy, we're looking for LAX. I mean, where do you think we're going? We're asking you, yes, for the Columbus, Ohio airport. And so, as nicely as we can, We're like, yes, yes, where's the Columbus, Ohio airport? And he's like, oh, I think you go down this way and that way. And so we're like, come on, guy, come on, spit it out. We're kind of in a hurry here now. And they were kind of completely unhelpful directions. So we're like, okay, thanks, bye. And we head off, sort of in the direction that he tells us. Oh man, by the grace of God, we find the airport. I don't even know how we did it. So at this point, we are in pretty good panic mode because we do not have a lot of time. And we have our 2-year-old daughter. And so as soon as we park in the parking garage, we jump out of our car and I grab Rihanna. And my husband is grabbing all of the luggage and our daughter's car seat because she had to take those on the airplane and everything. And I've got her diaper bag and my purse and a backpack and all this stuff. And I'm carrying Rihanna because she's little and we need to move. And you just should have seen us. We are like running as fast as we can. I'm way ahead of my husband. Poor guy. He's got our luggage. He's trying to like carry Rihanna's car seat. He's like limping along, trying to run after us. And I'm looking back at him like, come on, can't you go any faster? And he's like, I'm coming. We get into the airport, get into the ticket line, and we're like, okay, come on. We get up to the desk. And I'm like, oh, sorry we're late. There's a detour, construction. And it was like the ticket booth attendants just went into slow motion at that point. It's like they heard me say, could you please hurry? And they took that as, let's slow way down. So that's where the indifference of others, the incivility, you could just see it on their faces. They were like, oh yeah, you're late. Well, we're going to make you pay. I mean, they were just going so slow. And I'm trying to hold it together. Finally, they hand us our tickets and we hustle off to this other area. And for some reason, I've never experienced this before or since. There was a guy standing there that we had to walk past and get his, I guess, permission in a way. He was standing there with a hole puncher. And his job was to hole punch our tickets. Why? I don't know. He was just standing there. Like I said, I've never had anybody ever do this before. I've never had it happen after, but we had to have him hole punch them in order to keep going. This guy, I mean, it was like a complicated puzzle to him. He took our tickets and he was going about it so slow. He like had his tongue out to the side, like he was really pressing down and trying to get it just right. And I'm sitting there with my hands like reaching out to him, like, can I do that for you? Please let me do that for you. He was going so slow. And I don't know if it was my perception because I was panicked and in a hurry and he just seemed to me just so slow, or if he really was going that slow. Anyway, we make it past ticket punch guy. Of course, then you have to go through security. This is after 9/11. And I'm like, okay, we'll let them know. We're literally like minutes out from our plane being done boarding. And we're so late. And so this is, like I said, a little bit after 9/11. So we're doing the full major searches, shoes, everything. I'm thinking to myself, we're a family, got a little kid, we're in a hurry, we're late. Hopefully they'll just let us go. We get up to the security people and they're like, ma'am, your daughter is going to have to take off her shoes. Now this is where the restraint part comes in. Because what they didn't know is for my daughter, taking off her shoes was like a punishment to her. She hated to have her shoes taken off. And so oftentimes, this is so ridiculous. Oftentimes to get her to do what we wanted, we would say, Rihanna, if you don't do what we want, we're going to take off your shoes. No! And so then she would behave. I don't know why. She grew out of it really quickly. But at that point in time, taking off her shoes was a fiasco. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're seriously not going to make this 2-year-old take off her shoes. And I look at them and I'm like, please don't make me do this to her. She thinks it's a punishment. Now, of course, they don't understand what I'm talking about. I'm like, please don't do this. They're like, sorry, she has to take off her shoes. And I'm like, oh, you don't understand what this is going to do. And they're just not listening to me. They don't care, whatever. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh my gosh, does my 2-year-old look like a terrorist to you? Do I look like a terrorist? My husband is in the military. I'm very upset with them at this point. They're like, no, we're late. We are going to miss our plane. I'm like, shoes off. And so I just take my daughter's shoes and I pull them off. And of course, she freaks. I'm like, see, I told you so. And I was so mad at this point. So mad. I was at the point of, the height of being impatient. That, all my civility and everything just went out the door. And they're like, ma'am, you're going to have to take off your shoes as well. So it just wasn't very becoming of me, but I was so mad. I sat down and I just kicked my shoes off across the room. So bad. But I was so mad. My poor husband was standing there just like, oh my goodness, who is this woman that I married? Oh man, I did exactly what Bishop Sheen says here. He says to be impatient is to aggravate the evils we must endure and thus postpone their solution. So of course, me kicking my shoes off across the room, I had to go all the way over there, pick them up, come back, put them on. So I was just postponing the solution. If I had just done what they asked and done it quickly, probably would have been okay. So as soon as they were done with me and my daughter, I put on my shoes. I ran and sprinted down to the terminal that we needed to be at, or to the gate. And they were just closing the door, and I yelled at the attendant there. I was like, please don't shut the door. My husband and daughter are coming. They're coming, I promise. And she, had an annoyed look on her face, but she did hold the door, and we made it. And we sat down in our chairs and just collapsed onto the plane because I was so sure that we were going to miss this plane. But we did it, and we did it super impatient and with all of the trials that were thrown into our path. Gosh, it was just an event, a one big test and trial of my patience. I did not rise to the occasion whatsoever. But I did learn from it, sort of. I'm not the best when I'm at the airport. I will say that. I hope none of you ever meet me at an airport if things are going badly, because you're going to be like, oh, wow, Catholic Pilgrim, Amy, you are not shining very well right now. So 2 places that I hope people don't ever meet me is the DMV and the airport. But in all seriousness, though, patience really is, like Bishop Sheen says, it's the one virtue where we can literally practice it all the time. In every circumstance, patience is probably going to be needed most of the time in order to have peace of soul, like he says, for there are hardly any circumstances of life where it cannot be practiced. And so, the thing we do have to realize is that when we don't practice it well, and we don't either hold our tongue or, keep our wits about us or act in a civil way with manners, it reflects upon us, and people pass judgments because of that. And oftentimes we make things even worse than they would be, had we not lost our cool. And so that's something to keep in mind. Typically, being impatient will only make things worse. And so, I don't have any really good pieces of advice to give on how to be patient. I think it's just remembering that people are watching, remember that people are listening, especially when we're impatient with our kids and our spouse, our parents. They're watching, and our impatience reflects our soul, and we want to reflect a pure, clean, happy soul. And another thing is sometimes we just need to walk away from a situation. Obviously, I couldn't do that at the airport, but we did kind of learn our lesson. Allow yourself some wiggle room time. That might not solve everything, but at least you've got something there to have some buffer room. So if any of you have any great tips for how to be patient, share them on my Facebook or Instagram page. I would love to hear them because I am always looking for ways where I can grow in patience. But that is all for this week. I will see you back here for week 41. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.